welcome to Talking Point. Now, this week, Singaporeans were told in Parliament that terrorist Mas Selamat was given a refuge by his elder brother's family for a night after he escaped from detention in February 2008. His niece helped him disguise as a woman. His brother and sister-in-law gave him money, clothes, food, medicine to aid his getaway. They were charged, found guilty and sentenced to jail for helping the terrorists evade capture. Mas Selamat was caught last year in Malaysia and is now back in Singapore custody. The revelations about his relatives' complicity have led to several questions. First, how the fugitive slipped the net to reach their flat in the busy housing estate of Tampines, what we might have done in their shoes. Now joining me are Alvin Yeo, Chairman of the Government Parliamentary Committee for Home Affairs and Law, Associate Professor Kumar Ramakrishna, Head of the Centre of Excellence for National Security at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, and Abdul Rahim Sarip, President of the Malay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Now, welcome to the program. Let's dive straight into the issue of the manhunt and what happened there. And we read some questions and answers in Parliament. Were you satisfied that the authorities did their best to monitor the families and his contacts after Mas Selamat escaped?
I think I would have to say that I'm not totally satisfied, and I can also understand the public sort of being curious about what exactly was done. The obvious question that comes up is, this was his brother's house, why weren't they sort of like placing that under surveillance? Minister explained there were like some 200 to 300 potential leads, and there was a question of prioritizing, and they couldn't, for national security reasons, sort of say who exactly they were tailing, who they weren't. And I think we do understand, for national security reasons, some of this has to be kept sort of, so to speak, undercover. But as long as that is there's going to be this question unanswered in the public's mind.
Kumar, what do you think? I mean, this is almost an obvious question. And of course it affects how people view the security agencies and a sense of, and the authorities and how efficient they are. What is your takeaway from this point?
Essentially, if you look at similar cases in other parts of the world, these militants, whenever they do escape or try to elude the law, they do not, as a rule, the pattern seems to be, they do not actually go to their families. They seek out like-minded fellow militants in the movement. For example, you look at Indonesia, when Nordin Top was on the run, before him Azahari Hussein, it was essentially the movement, the fellow members of the movement that sheltered them and provided them with funding and money and all the other necessities to keep them going. I suppose in this particular case, the first order of business from the operational agency's point of view would be to sort of go back and they would have taken a look at any vestiges or remnants of the movement in Singapore that, as far as we all know, was virtually decimated by 2002. So the fact that...
then the obvious question is, why not then are you surveilling your closest relatives, you would say?
But as a reflex, they wouldn't actually do that. They would go and look at the movement first. But it's a good question that you raised. If the movement had been decimated by 2002,
yes,
you know, so what about the rest of the known as... It doesn't have to be relatives, it could be close associates. They may not be part of the movement, but friends, you know. There are still some questions.
And having said that, he hadn't been in contact with his family for a long while, as far as we understand. In detention, he had to meet his immediate family. So it actually just is a bit baffling how he managed to make his way to Tampines, expecting his niece to be there. And I mean, I presume that says something about his state of mind or his ability.
Well, he was trained in Afghanistan. He is a known militant with that kind of leadership and strategic potential. He was wanted not just in Singapore but in the region, precisely because of his leadership potential, his ability to plan operations, to recruit and to sort of mobilize resources to conduct attacks. To me, as an analyst, right, the fact that he was able to survive for a few days after escaping, elude detection by the authorities and somehow make his way to Tampines.
Despite the massive publicity that was out everywhere.
To me, yeah, essentially suggests that perhaps there is some truth to the fact that he has significant operational pedigree.
Do you think there is an issue of accountability here in that Minister also talked about how the whole committee of inquiry had looked into the lapses at the Whitley Road Detention Centre, and that issue more or less has been fully explained to the public. But in terms of the search, now that more information is coming out, do you think that we need to look at accountability of the search process and what happened in the last before Mas Selamat was caught?
There were some questions asked about this in Parliament as well. I think what the Minister explained is they have an account from Mas Selamat as to what happened from the time he left the Whitley Detention Centre to the time, I suppose, he made his way to Malaysia. They're not sure whether he's totally on the level in terms of that account. This particular episode from the 29th of February to the 1st of March, they feel fairly certain of that because it's tallied with obviously the accounts that they got from interviewing the niece's family. So I think there will be more details, I think, coming out about the other days he was away or had escaped, I think, as they are able to verify it. And he sort of explained that for security issues, they couldn't go live with all that account because they're still trying to pursue leads.
Okay. Rob, do you think that, the authorities are very concerned usually about balancing the need for security with maintaining privacy for the families, the people involved, so that as to allow them to continue to rehabilitate or to live a normal life as far as possible in Singapore. Do you think, where do you draw the line between balancing this need and pursuing a lead when you're investigating? What do you think?
Well, if you look at the thought process of the family, when they decided, to harbor him, what were going through their minds? A relative appeared at your front door seeking help. A 25-year-old niece was there. What would she do? Or what did she do? What was she thinking? Was helping him in the way they did the correct thing to do?
Yes.
Or was there another way to help him? You remember in the 70s during the drug issues, drug problem, drug addicts were weeded out. Families were turning in, the sons, relatives, brothers, so that they can be rehabilitated. So if Mas Selamat's family had gone through that path, perhaps a different outcome, would happen. But in this case, they did not.
Were you surprised that there seems to be some sympathy towards the family?
I'm not surprised because I think it's a natural feeling to help someone that you're kin to. It was the wrong thing to do in this set of circumstances, but I think that it would be totally sort of like unrealistic to not expect that kind of pressure or temptation or inclination to help someone who looks to be in need.
All right, thank you. Hold that thought. We're going to come back and talk a little bit further on that. Time for a short break. When we come back, we'll look at the questions to which there are no easy answers. What were the motivations that lay behind the family's actions? What would you have done in their position? Stay with us.
天网可不是人人都能当的哦，除了我和你。把身体交给手，手感3D 按摩 ，O 型天网椅立刻给你天王般的放松。当颈肩要舒缓，睡前要放松，白天要充电，只要身体有需求，它都有求必应。天王制作，等你来做 O 型天王椅。
OSIM.
And I see the passion of the designer creating it.
It has all the rainbow colors in it. It's peaceful, it's beautiful. So this is where we would like to bring to people to see the artistic side of nature. With talented people, working with talented people, the future is always bright between Yuli and Zora.
It's 36 to 38 degrees Celsius. No higher, no lower. It's soft, but not too soft. It's just enough to smooth things out. It's all of this, halfway to anywhere, with plenty of time to spare. The Qatar Airways Premium Terminal in Doha. 5-star service for first and business class passengers. Qatar Airways, the world's 5-star airline.
Welcome back to Talking Point. Tonight we're discussing the revelation that terrorist Mas Selamat was sheltered and aided by members of his family after his escape from detention in Singapore 2 years ago. Now let's talk about public reaction to the fact that, his family helped him. Some members of his family helped him. Would it be a case of the seriousness of the crime, people not being convinced so much about the seriousness of the crime? What do you think was the motivation? Kumar.
Essentially, I have to agree with my colleagues here. Kinship exerts a very powerful pull. It's a very primordial impulse. As to whether or not it is conceivable that a family in that situation would give up or should consider giving up the relative to the law, to be fair, that has happened as well in other places in the world.
Yes,
For example, you look at the case of the failed Christmas Day bomb plot, Nigerian Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. It was his father who had alerted the US authorities that there was something wrong with him and they should beware of what he was up to. So while I understand the reactions of the family in this case, it is also not impossible for even kin to make reasonable, informed decisions based on a more, a realistic appreciation of the wider situation. Difficult though as it may be.
Could it also be because some of his family or some of the people out there are not completely convinced about the argument that he was responsible for plotting a terrorist attack on Singapore?
Sorry, Debra, I was just going to jump in and say that you asked this question about is it the seriousness of the crime, and I think that would be a live fact in anyone's mind. If someone was a sort of axe murderer, serial murderer, you would the strong inclination to turn that person in. But supposing your relative comes out and swears blind that they're innocent and they haven't done all these things, again, it's not a question perhaps of maybe not being convinced, but wanting to believe in your kin. And I think that's probably what happened here. They allowed that to override perhaps their better sense of right and wrong.
Robin, what do you think? Because
I think if you recall, Mas Selamat, when they appeared at the door, only the niece was at home.
Yes.
So they had several, maybe hours together where anything could happen. I don't know what they spoke about, perhaps the niece was convinced by his pleas and so on, and influenced her or persuaded her to allow him to stay. And she, in fact, persuaded the other members to do likewise. So having been in the house, again, question what do you do about the situation? Do you call the authorities and betray? Question of betrayal also will come out, So a lot of things going on in the minds of the relatives. So they are in a very tight spot, So what do we do?
And from what we know, there was dissension among the family members in the house as to what should we do. So apparently a few of them were not that keen to actually harbour, but ultimately they came around to the niece's point of view.
But there's also that point about how a few days later, when they were asked questions by the authorities, they denied, they managed to escape any sense that they had helped him, and for over 2 years. They only admitted to it after, obviously, the authorities had gotten some confirmation from Mas Selamat himself.
That's right.
So that sense of betrayal, in a way, worked both ways, I guess. Ruben, what do you think?
Well, again, it's an issue of do they turn themselves in, so they have to serve time. So what were the considerations they have in their minds, there is a rule against self-incrimination. They don't want to incriminate themselves, but I suppose they made a decision, right? And they will not betray him in that sense, because if they have given information, that doesn't square with what they have decided earlier.
Okay, which brings me back to the other point, which is that the seriousness of the crime, what he was capable of doing. Do you think Singaporeans are being too complacent? Do they understand the seriousness of terrorism and terrorist attacks? Or do you think that, no, that's what the authorities say, I don't believe it, this is my uncle?
Well, you just have to think back to the recent exercise conducted by the Home Affairs Ministry and the vehicle with the fumes coming out and about, I believe the figure was 3% out of the total number of people that passed by actually responding, calling the authorities.
There's definitely an element of complacency, and the problem is the most effective way to shake someone out of their complacency is for something to happen, but that's not what you want to happen.
Some people have said that this is an issue of kinship more than about race and religion. That was some of comments in cyberspace. Why did the authorities always have to go on about how, oh no, we have confidence in the community, it's not a community issue, it is. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I think this issue as an ongoing issue, because when the story first broke about Mas Selamat escaping about 2 years back, there were a lot of discussion, a lot of views were aired, about the community not being pointed at, not being targeted, and so on. So this is a continuing event. And as we see more and more details coming out, as the case right now, do we again revive and re-argue the old issues, which I don't think is helpful. The community's reaction mirrors that of the Singaporeans' reaction. So I do not think that the issue of race and religion should be raised in this particular instance. There's an issue involving the decision of a family to make the decision that they did, and they're paying the price for it. They've been, to me, I think it's a criminal issue. They've been dealt with under penal code, not under the ISA, but under the penal code. They've been sentenced to jail. They've been living with the secret for the past 2.5 years. Probably can't sleep every night. Waiting for the knock on the door at midnight, so to speak. So I think we should focus that it is a criminal matter, and leave it as that, and not make conclusions which are not helpful.
So let's turn now to the issue of penal code and the punishment, severity of punishment. Alvin, you had mentioned earlier that there are mixed reactions there. Some people think it's severe enough, some people think it's not. What is some of the feedback that you've gotten?
Actually, I would say that I've received more feedback that they thought the sentences were actually not that heavy, which I think indicates how seriously people take the sort of terrorism threat. Well, some people take that, and how helping a terrorist is actually something that's very serious offense. But I think that there's some sympathy also for the fact that they don't appear, as I said, to be sort of subscribing to the sort of cause of Mas Selamat, but really giving into, I think the word used was self-misguided feelings of family kinship. So I think it's a difficult balance to strike, but I think the very fact that they were prosecuted and received substantial sentences, I think will send a message out.
Kumar, do you think it was relatively light?
This is one example where I think we're getting mixed signals from the public in terms of the feedback I've been getting. It basically goes back to this issue that this is a very complicated moral problem. My own guess is that the reason why the sentences were fairly, not that strict, maximum was 18 months, is reflective of the fact that there is an appreciation within the authorities system that we are engaged in ultimately, at a broader level, we are engaged in a counter-ideological conflict where essentially every action or reaction of government and the intelligence agencies against the terrorists are scrutinized online in cyberspace. So one of the things which the radical ideologues always look for is evidence, so to speak, snippets or information that will feed into the narrative, the wider narrative, that ultimately the government is against a particular community. So there's a real challenge.
Yes.
Just wanted to add that, what the agencies do is they make the decision to prosecute, but the actual sentence is actually in the hands of a judge.
Yeah.
But whether these factors are at play in his mind, obviously that might well be so. Though it's not something that, the judicial decision making isn't something that one isn't sort of like publicized in that sense.
I think that 18-month sentence, for harboring him, for about a day, based on all the circumstances that were before the court, I think it's fair. And also importantly, they were represented by counsel.
Yes.
There was a defense counsel who made submissions for the mitigation. I thought that it was a sentence that was appropriate in the circumstances.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much for joining us this week. It's no surprise that the latest installment in the Mas Selamat Kasturi story is still a talking point because it highlights concerns that are critical to Singapore, complex issues of loyalty to nation over family ties, race and religion, and at the heart of it, the security of our nation and people. There are still many unanswered questions on his escape, what he did in the 2 days before he turned up at his brother's flat, and how he left Singapore, for example. No doubt the authorities will update us as they find out more. Let's hope the lessons learned go beyond the authorities for each Singaporean to question and examine what we would do to protect our fellow citizens over our families. Good night.